My name is Thomas. I've been working the late shift at our local Burger King for about 2 years now. It's not glamorous, but it pays rent and the hours work for me. I'm a night owl anyway, so being behind the drive-thru window from 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. doesn't bother me the way it would most people. This all started maybe a month ago. I was working the drive-thru solo. We're usually understaffed after midnight, and that's when a car pulled up to the speaker. Male voice, pretty unremarkable. He ordered a large double Whopper with cheese meal with a Coke. It was pretty standard. The one notable thing about the encounter was when he went to pay, he only rolled the window down just enough to slide his card through, and his windows were tinted so I couldn't see his face. He paid and I handed him his receipt, but then he just drove off, like without stopping at the second window to grab his food. I waited there with his bag for a few minutes, wondering if he'd be coming back. Eventually, I just set the order aside and ended up eating it later. People do weird stuff sometimes, so I didn't think about it too much. About a week later, it happened again. It was the same order and the same exact thing happened. Someone paid at the first window and then drove off before picking up the food. I remember thinking, that's strange. Someone did the exact same thing last week. But I wasn't quite able to connect the dots at that point. I just figured it was a coincidence. It wasn't until it happened a third time that I realized it was the same person making these orders. At that point, I knew something weird was going on, but I wasn't going to complain. The food was made, paid for, and I was the one who got to enjoy it, so I kept eating the free Whopper meals and tried not to think too hard about why some random dude was essentially buying me dinner every few days. This went on for a few more weeks. The guy would show up every 4 or 5 days, always late, usually between 1 and 3 a.m., and always with the same order. I started to almost look forward to it in a weird way, like, it's been a few days, wonder if my mysterious benefactor is going to show up tonight. One night, I was working the speaker at around 2 a.m. when I heard that familiar voice through the speaker. I knew what was about to happen, and I was right. He ordered the same meal, which I knew I'd be eating. But this time, he said something else, something that made me freeze up. He said, and I'll never forget this, "I hope you've been enjoying those Whoppers, Mr. Hurley." My last name is Hurley. I don't wear a name tag with my last name on it. It's not posted anywhere customers can see. There's no reason at all that this guy should know my last name. I just stood there for a second, not saying anything. My brain couldn't catch up. Then I started talking into the speaker, asking who this was, what he wanted, and how he knew my name. I must have said, "Who is this?" 4 or 5 times, but he never answered. And this time, he didn't even pull up to pay. I heard his engine rev, and then he was gone. I was rattled for the rest of my shift. There was nothing I could do, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. Little did I know, things were about to get much worse. When I got home after my shift, I found a note on my doorstep. It was a handwritten note that said, "I know what you did. You have 3 days." I just stood there staring at it with my hand shaking, and I started feeling really, really sick, like someone had punched me in the gut. I have no idea what I supposedly did. I've been racking my brain trying to think of anything that could explain this, but I've got nothing. This sounds so stupid, but I don't have enemies or secrets. I'm a 24-year-old guy that works at Burger King and plays video games on his days off. I'm not exactly living the most exciting life. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I just sat on my couch with the lights on, dreading whatever was going to happen next. But nothing happened. I had no choice but to just move on. It turned out I wouldn't have to wait that long, because the next night at work, that guy was back. This time, he didn't even bother playing games. Instead of ordering food, he just asked me to write something down. Then, before I could even respond, he gave me an address. It was some random place on the outskirts of town, in an area I didn't recognize, and then he told me I had 2 days to deliver him $10,000. I damn near laughed at that. I didn't think he was serious, but he clearly wasn't kidding. As soon as he drove off, I immediately went back to being terrified. There was absolutely no way I'd be giving that guy $10,000. I didn't even have $10,000. I still don't. So I decided to ignore it. I figured it had to be some elaborate scam or prank from someone I knew. I should have called the police right then, but I didn't even think of that. 3 nights later, I thought things were over. I hadn't dropped any money off and nothing had happened. But of course, I was wrong. I was sitting there watching TV, winding down from my shift, when out of nowhere, I was jolted up by the sound of shattering glass. I hit the floor on instinct, thinking someone was shooting at me. But when I finally got up and looked around, I realized someone had just thrown a rock through my window. By the time I went to look outside, whoever had been there was long gone. This time, I called the police. I told them everything, including the address I had been given, and they said they'd check it out and told me to stay vigilant. They really didn't do much, they just told me they'd patrol the area a little more closely, and that without any doorstep footage, which I obviously don't have, there was nothing they could do. And that was 3 days ago. I've called in sick to work the last 3 nights, but I don't even think that's going to do anything since the guy clearly knows where I live. I can't afford to not work, and I can't afford to move, so I'm stuck in this nightmare until the police can track that person down. I think I might try getting them to track the credit card number that the guy used to pay for the Whopper meals, but other than that, I'm not really sure what to do. Why I got targeted, I have no idea. Hopefully things don't escalate from here. I graduated from college about 8 months ago with a degree in communications, which, as I'm sure you can imagine, has been incredibly useful in helping me secure gainful employment. That's sarcasm, by the way. I'm still living with my parents, and I haven't been able to find a real job yet, so I'm off to a great start. In the meantime, I drive for Uber and Uber Eats, sometimes both in the same night, depending on what's popping. It's not a career, but it's money, and it lets me feel like I'm doing something productive while I figure my life out. I know that sounds kind of pathetic, but it's what I've got right now. I drive mostly on weekend nights, Friday and Saturday, usually from around 9 p.m. until 2 or 3 in the morning. That's when the surge pricing kicks in and the drunk college kids need rides home from the bars downtown. It's not technically a night shift, but it feels like one. This happened a few weeks ago. It was a Saturday night, maybe around 1:30, and I was about ready to call it. I was about to turn off the app when one more request came through. The pickup was downtown, which was fine, but the drop-off location was really far away, past the suburbs even. I almost declined it for that reason, but the fare was too good. The girl I picked up was completely normal. The drive took about 40 minutes. By the time I dropped her off, it was past 2, and then I was alone, out in the middle of absolutely nowhere with a 40-minute drive back to civilization. I turned the car around and started heading home. Not 10 minutes into the drive, I saw a car stopped in the middle of the road with its hazards on. I approached cautiously, and I realized there were 2 people standing in front of the car, waving their arms like they were trying to flag me down. My first instinct was actually not to stop, but I'm someone who can't just ignore a person in need. So against my better judgment, I decided to stop. I stopped the car about 20 feet away from them and rolled my window down a few inches. Just enough to hear them, but not enough for someone to reach inside. It was a middle-aged couple, which actually put me at ease a little. That is, until they started talking. The woman did most of the talking. She had this frantic energy about her, but also something that felt slightly rehearsed, like she'd given the speech before. She said they were warning drivers about a collapsed bridge ahead. She went on to say it happened earlier that day, and they'd almost driven right off themselves. She pointed down the road into the darkness, and said if I kept going that way, I'd end up in the river. So naturally, I asked them what I should do instead. The husband spoke of a turnoff that was about halfway between where we were and the bridge. He said it cut through the woods and that it would add some time to my drive, but it would get me back to the main highway without having to deal with the bridge. I thanked them and started driving. Something felt off. I didn't know what it was, but I knew one thing. I was gonna trust my gut and just drive the way I had been intending to go. About a mile down the road, I saw the turnoff they'd been talking about. It was this narrow dirt path that disappeared into the trees, and it was barely wide enough for one car. I decided to keep driving, and a few minutes later, I reached the bridge. I slowed down a little, but it was fine. It wasn't collapsed for sure, and it didn't even look damaged at all. I drove across it without any issues and made it back to the main highway a few minutes later. Even though nothing happened, The experience stuck with me to the point where I didn't sleep well that night. I kept thinking about what would have happened if I'd followed that couple's instructions, if I'd turned down that dirt road alone in the middle of the night. A few days later, the curiosity got the better of me and I did something stupid. I drove back out there. It was the middle of the afternoon this time, broad daylight, which made me feel slightly less insane about the whole thing. I retraced my route from that night. Those people weren't there this time, obviously. When I got to the turnoff, that dirt path into the woods, I slowed down and pulled over. To my surprise, there was something new. There was a sign nailed to a tree right at the entrance of the path that simply said, "Dead End." That sign hadn't been there before. I would have definitely noticed it that night, even in the dark. Someone had put it up in the last few days. I sat in my car for a minute, staring at the path. In the daylight, it didn't look quite as ominous. It was just a narrow dirt road that disappeared into some dense trees. I wanted to explore it a little, but I was worried about my car getting stuck, so I decided to go it on foot. I'm not sure what I was expecting to find, but being that there was daylight out, I really wasn't scared at all. I turned off my engine. As soon as I stepped out of the car, though, I got a bad feeling. I stood there at the edge of the path, trying to see further down, but there wasn't much to see really. I don't know what it was, but something about standing there and actually being out in the open discouraged me from walking in. Things went from 0 to 100 in about 2 seconds. As I was turning around and walking back to my car, I heard a scream ring out behind me. It was this awful scream, definitely a woman's, and it came from somewhere deep in the woods down the path. I can't tell you how fast I was out of there. Before I could even think, I was already speeding away. I don't think I've ever been so scared before, and that was about 2 weeks ago. I haven't been back to that spot since, but here's the thing. I can't stop thinking about it. Part of me knows I should just leave it alone, but I've been thinking about asking one of my friends to come out there with me. If I do, I'll record a video and send it, but for now, all I can really do is wonder about that scream and those people. This happened a few winters ago when I was working overnight security for a commercial warehouse complex. I was 26 and had been doing the job for 8 months. The shift ran from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., and I was always the only employee on the site. There was a supervisor I could call if something went wrong, but for the most part, it was just me and the cameras. The complex was in an industrial area on the edge of a small city that didn't have much nightlife. Most nights followed the same routine. Clock in, do a walkthrough of the exterior, then settle into the security office to monitor the cameras. And every hour, another patrol. The warehouse stored mostly industrial equipment and bulk supplies, nothing particularly valuable. The night everything went sideways started pretty normally. It was cold enough for there to be snow falling, but nothing too heavy. I did my first patrol, everything was secure, and I went back to the office. Around 1:30 a.m., I got a motion alert on one of the loading dock cameras. This wasn't unusual. The system was sensitive, and wind or animals could trigger it. I pulled out the feed and watched for a minute, but everything looked normal. Just the empty dock and snow drifting past the floodlights. But the alerts kept coming. Every 10 or 15 minutes, the same camera would trigger. Each time I'd check the feed, and each time I'd see nothing. What started to bother me was that the movement always seemed to happen just at the edge of the frame, like something was there but not quite in view. By 2:30, I had maybe 6 or 7 alerts from the same camera. No other cameras were triggering, just that one. At 3 a.m., I went outside to check it myself. The snow had mostly stopped and the complex was dead silent. I walked the full perimeter of the dock area with my flashlight. I didn't see anything unusual. All the bay doors were closed and locked, and there were no footprints in the snow except for mine. I went back inside. About 20 minutes later, I heard a loud, metallic scraping sound, like something heavy being dragged across concrete. It came from inside the warehouse, somewhere deep in the building. I checked the interior cameras, but all 6 feeds showed empty aisles. I was starting to freak out a little bit because I started feeling like I was being toyed with, or watched somehow. But still, I explained the noise away by chalking it up to the wind or something. An hour later, though, I heard it again. It was louder this time. The dragging sound, followed by a sharp bang, like something had struck one of the interior doors. I cycled through the cameras again. Nothing on 1 through 5. When I got to camera 6, though, the feed was black. Maybe 3 seconds of static, and then it came back. But something was different. The angle had shifted, just a few degrees to the left, like someone had bumped the camera or adjusted its position. At that point, I had no choice. I grabbed my flashlight and radio and headed into the warehouse. The interior was massive, probably 80,000 square feet of industrial shelving arranged in long aisles. During the day, it was bright and full of forklifts. At night, the overhead lights were dimmed to save power, casting everything in this yellowish half light. I was maybe halfway down the main aisle when I heard footsteps coming from somewhere to my left. It definitely sounded like someone, a person walking maybe 2 or 3 aisles over. As soon as I stopped, the footsteps stopped too. I stood there trying to control my breathing. I remember how tense it was, standing there in complete silence, waiting for a sound that I wasn't even sure would come. After what felt like forever, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to break the silence. In a firm voice, I announced my presence as security and insisted that whoever was there make things easy and reveal themselves. But of course, there was no response. The rest of that patrol was utterly terrifying. I was bracing myself for a fight or some kind of confrontation, and the longer I surveyed without finding anyone, the worse that feeling got. But I ultimately finished my patrol without seeing another person, which was arguably worse because I knew with 100% certainty that there was someone in there. I didn't see or hear anything for the rest of my shift, but that didn't make me feel any better. I actually felt somewhat guilty. My job was laughably simple, and I was messing it up in real time. But by the time 7 rolled around, I wanted nothing more than to just get out of there. I reported everything to my supervisor when he showed up on site. Maintenance did a full inspection, but didn't find anything either. Even after everything was double and triple checked, no one was able to identify the method of entry, and I could tell people didn't believe my story. Still though, that night remains one of the freakiest things that has ever happened to me. This memory still terrifies me, and outside of police and some close family, this is my first time fully revisiting it. A few years ago, I had gotten my first job at a 24-hour gym. At the time, I was in a gap year between high school and college, so I worked a lot of night shifts. The gym was open 24/7 and accessed by key card only, meaning often there were only 1 or 2 employees working. People could just check in, use the equipment, and leave. The whole facility pretty much managed itself. All entries, exits, and usage of equipment was processed digitally, so all I had to really do was sit in the office and keep an eye on the cameras. I would occasionally get up and walk around, do some light cleaning, and even talk to some of the guests. This was in a pretty bad part of town, but for the most part, everyone was nice and friendly, and it was one of those gyms where everyone kind of knows each other considering how few people really come in. This one night in particular, I was working from 8 p.m. until 6 a.m., which is generally a very long, boring shift, but everything that happened that night keeps me up at night to this day. It was around 2 a.m. when I had already done multiple rounds around the building and finished all routine paperwork. I was exhausted, so I just figured I'd sit down for a bit and monitor the cameras. Everything was normal at first. Not many people come in to work out in the middle of the night, but there were a couple regulars who came and went. I had worked here for a few months now, so almost everyone I recognized, except one man. I first noticed him when I saw him using a treadmill in the far corner. Normally this wouldn't catch my attention, as we have new guests from time to time. However, what really caught me off guard was how fast this man was running. I pulled up his treadmill number in the system, where I'm able to live monitor all equipment activity. He was running 9 miles per hour, which was impressive already, but what really shocked me was the fact that he never stopped. 10 minutes went by, then 15. He never slowed or stopped. I looked closer at the camera, and although I can't quite describe it in detail, this man was nothing short of unsettling. He was wearing ragged clothes, He had long, messy hair, and his face never moved once. He was just staring straight forward. Then I noticed his feet. He was barefoot. He had been running 9 miles per hour for 15 minutes barefoot, just staring into the distance. At this point in time, I was very weirded out, especially since he was now the only person in the building besides myself. I pulled myself together and realized that we do have a policy requiring shoes, so I decided I would use that as an excuse to go talk to him. Although his appearance really freaked me out, I got up the courage to leave the office and head out to talk to him. The machine he was on was located almost directly outside the employee hallway, and as soon as I turned that corner, my heart stopped. The treadmill was covered in blood. His feet were tearing apart as he ran. My heart dropped. Blood not only dripping, but splattering from his feet and ankles for every step he took. His face was still stone cold, staring straight ahead. His mouth was wide open as he ran. He looked like he was on every drug on the planet. At this point, I was terrified. He looked crazy enough to the point that my gut was telling me he was dangerous. However, I still mustered up the courage to yell at him to stop. I can't even remember exactly what I said, but I did have to raise my voice a bit so he would hear me over the thudding of his feet as he sprinted. He didn't say a word, or even turn his head for that matter. He just continued to sprint and stare forward with his mouth open. I yelled again, something along the lines of, "Hello, what are you doing?" He then muttered the words, "Are you there?" in the coldest, raspiest voice I've ever heard. He wasn't out of breath or even panting as he spoke. I told him to stop a few more times, and he repeatedly just said, "Are you there?" The pool of blood at the end of the conveyor was growing, and at this point, I just figured I'd call the cops. I went back to the office, picked up my phone, but before I called, I glanced at the monitors again. He was staring directly at the camera, sprinting, bleeding, mouth open, staring at the camera. I turned away and then heard him screaming from outside the door. He wasn't even screaming words, just screaming at the top of his lungs as he stared at me through the camera. Suddenly, he hopped off the treadmill. He didn't even turn it off, and he sprinted out of view of the camera. I immediately started clicking through the feed searching for him, but he was out of view of every camera we had in the building. I had checked every camera except one, the employee hallway. Sure enough, there he was, about 6 feet from the office door, just standing there. I don't even know how he had gotten into this hallway without a keycard, but I didn't hesitate to quickly lock the door. Almost 5 seconds after I locked it, the doorknob rattled. Now I was calling the cops. He started screaming again and shaking the door as I explained to dispatch what was happening. They told me police were 5 minutes out, as I just waited in the corner of the office while this man was trying to get inside. His scream was terrifying. It was so deep it barely sounded human, and he kept it up for an unbelievably long time. This went on for about 3 minutes. I thought if he got in here I was gonna die, and I felt absolutely helpless. Suddenly though, the screaming stopped and the door didn't move. I checked the cameras again and he was gone. I couldn't see him anywhere. Eventually, the police arrived and I made them search the entire place before I would even leave the office. They told me he was nowhere to be found. I answered their questions and drove home. I quit the next day and have not entered that gym since. I have no idea what that man wanted, or what kind of crazy he was. I still wonder what would have happened if I didn't lock that door. Okay, so I used to work night shift at a small hotel, and this happened about a year ago. But I still think about it all the time because it genuinely freaked me out so bad, and I don't know what the guy's plan was or what he was trying to do. And it honestly makes me feel sick when I remember just how long he was there and that I didn't even realize he wasn't supposed to be there. The hotel was small, only 3 floors and maybe 40 rooms total. It wasn't a busy place. Usually we only had about 10 or 15 rooms filled on weeknights. I worked from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. It was usually really boring and quiet, which was fine with me. I would just sit behind the desk, do some paperwork, sometimes check the cameras, sometimes watch YouTube on my phone if it was really dead. The lobby wasn't big, just the desk and some couches off to the side with the TV, and then some vending machines in the corner. Behind the desk was a little office where I had a computer and a chair and a glass window so I could see the lobby while I sat in there. At night, the front doors locked automatically, so guests had to buzz in, and I would press a button to let them through. Usually nothing happened after midnight except the occasional guest coming in late. But one night, this man came in around 11, and everything about it still makes my stomach drop when I think about it. He buzzed the door and I let him in. He looked mid-40s, tall, kind of skinny, but not too skinny, and he was wearing jeans and a baseball cap, carrying a backpack. He walked up to the desk and asked if we had a room for the night. I told him yes and gave him the price, and he nodded and pulled out a card. I swiped it, it went through, and I gave him a key card for room 214 on the second floor. I remember he looked at me for a second too long before he left. He had this kind of blank expression, and his eyes stayed on me for maybe 3 or 4 seconds after I handed him the key. Then he turned and walked off toward the elevator. Nothing about it screamed dangerous right away, but it was enough to make me notice him. After that, I sat back in the chair and played on my phone for a while. Around midnight, I looked up and he was back in the lobby. He didn't come to the desk, he just walked past me and sat down in the lounge area with the couches. The TV wasn't on, but he just sat down facing it. I figured maybe he couldn't sleep or something. Some guests hang out in the lobby sometimes, so I didn't think too much of it. But then after half an hour, I realized he was literally just sitting there doing nothing. He wasn't on his phone or reading. He wasn't even dozing off. He was just staring straight ahead at the blank screen. I got up at one point to grab water from the vending machine, and when I walked across the lobby, I felt him turn his head and watch me the whole way. I didn't look at him directly, but I could feel his eyes on me until I was back behind the desk. It gave me this really uneasy feeling. Around 1 a.m., I was checking the reservation system on the computer because I was bored, and that's when I noticed something weird. I pulled up the occupied room list and saw that room 214 said vacant. I mumbled what the f*** under my breath and double-checked, because I literally just checked this guy in an hour earlier. I thought maybe I made a mistake, so I looked at the check-in logs, and there was nothing for him. No name, no charge, nothing. Then I went into the transaction screen to make sure his card had gone through earlier, and it showed no payments. I remember feeling confused as hell, because I swore I swiped his card and it beeped like it worked, but there was nothing in the system at all. That's when I picked up the phone and called room 214. It rang like 10 times, but no answer. Then I checked the key card entry log, which tells you if the door to that room was open that night, and it showed nothing. No one had entered the room. That's when I realized he never even went to the room after I gave him the card. I looked over into the lounge, and there he was, still sitting there staring at the TV that wasn't even on. I started to get this awful feeling in my chest. I sat there debating what to do. Part of me thought maybe the system just glitched, but the fact that the room had no entry log and no charge made it pretty clear he wasn't even checked in. I waited another 15 minutes just watching him. Around 1:30, I walked over and asked if everything was okay. He turned his head and looked at me with no expression, and he told me he just couldn't sleep. Then he turned back toward the TV. I nodded and went back behind my desk, but my hands were shaking. Around 2, I noticed he wasn't sitting in the lounge anymore. My stomach dropped right away because I didn't see him in the lobby at all. I scanned the area, and then I spotted him standing at the end of the hallway by the bathrooms, half hidden in the dark. He was just standing still. I kept glancing up at him, pretending to be on the computer. He stood there for a while, and then slowly walked back and sat in the lounge again like nothing happened. I called my manager at home and explained what was going on. She sounded tired and told me to just keep an eye on him and call the police if he did anything threatening. I remember hanging up and thinking that it already felt threatening, but I didn't know what else to do. I checked the security cameras after that. I saw him on the first floor hallway camera. He walked all the way down the hall, stopped at the end, stood there for several minutes, then walked back. Later he went into the stairwell and stayed in there for about 10 minutes. I don't know what he was doing in there. Every time I looked up from the computer, he was somewhere else, near the vending machines or by the elevators, once just standing near the corner of the lobby where the light didn't hit well. He was always staring. By 3:30, I couldn't take it anymore, so I called the non-emergency police line and explained that there was a man in the hotel who I didn't think was a guest. They said they'd send someone. While I was waiting, I noticed he moved again, this time closer to the desk. He was standing maybe 15 feet away, just watching me. He didn't blink much, and he definitely didn't speak. He just stared like he had a staring problem. I pretended to type something on the computer, but I was so scared I could hardly breathe. At around 3:50, the buzzer went off, and I thought maybe it was the cops already, but it was just another guest coming back late. I let him in quickly, and the man turned his head and watched the guest walk past. I noticed his eyes follow him the whole way across the lobby. That scared me even more, because it was like he was studying him. A few minutes later, the man disappeared again. I checked the cameras and saw him standing outside one of the guest room doors on the first floor, like he was literally just standing there. So that's when I called actual 911. I told them he was outside a guest's room and I didn't know what he was trying to do. They said officers were on the way. I kept my eyes glued on the camera feed, and he just stood at the door for about 3 minutes, then slowly walked back to the lobby. When he came back, he walked right up to the desk this time and leaned over the counter. He looked at me and asked if there was any food. His voice was so low it was disturbing. I told him there were vending machines in the corner. He gave a small smile, then walked away. I just sat there staring at the clock, begging the cops to get there. Finally, around 4:10, 2 officers showed up. I let them in and pointed right at him. He was back in the lounge, sitting down. They walked over and talked to him for a few minutes. They asked for his ID and asked him questions I couldn't hear. Then they walked him out. One of the officers came back and explained that the guy wasn't a guest at all. The credit card he gave me was stolen, and he had no bags or reservation. He had just been pretending so he could get access to the building. They charged him with trespassing and the stolen card. After they left, I sat there shaking until my shift was over. Every time I looked at the cameras, I expected to see him again. The part that messed me up the most was realizing he had been inside the hotel for hours, wandering around and standing outside guest rooms, watching me from different spots, and he was never even supposed to be there. I have no idea what his plan was, but I know it wasn't good. That was the scariest night of my life. My name is Meredith. I'm 24, and I work the night shift at a tiny gas station off County Road 11. It's the kind of place most people don't even notice unless they're out of gas or completely lost. I took the job because it was quiet and predictable. I liked that, or at least I used to. It started on a Thursday night around 1 a.m. The air outside was wet and still, and the hum of the overhead lights had been getting under my skin all shift. I was just about to microwave a cinnamon roll I didn't even really want when the door chimed. A man walked in, mid-40s, maybe older. He had a green coat, messy hair, and dry lips like he hadn't smiled in years. He didn't head for the coffee or chips like most people. He just stood near the counter, staring at me with a strange kind of familiarity. "Hi," I said, forcing a polite smile. Then the man said, "You always work this late?" I blinked and said, yeah, mostly." He smiled. Then he said, "I figured. I've passed through a few times. Noticed it's always you." That unsettled me more than I let show. "Oh yeah, right, small town," I said. He didn't leave. "Meredith, right?" I froze. I wasn't wearing a name tag. I was about to ask him how he knew, but he followed it with saying that I have nice handwriting, and he motioned to the whiteboard where I had written cinnamon coffee is back. Most people dot their I's like circles. You use little slashes. It's very specific, thoughtful. I didn't respond. He didn't buy anything, just stood there for another minute watching me, like he was studying my reactions. Then he finally nodded. "I'm Paul," he said. "Just curious, that's all." And then he walked out into the fog. After that, he started showing up randomly. Not every night, not enough to scream stalker out loud, but often enough that I stopped assuming it was a coincidence. Sometimes he'd come inside, sometimes he'd just sit in his car near the edge of the lot with his headlights off. One night, I tried to ignore him. He came in, bought a bottle of water, and lingered like always. "You're quieter tonight," he said. "Long shift," I muttered. He slowly looked around the store, like he was taking inventory of everything. "It must get lonely, just you out here in the dark, no one else for miles," he said. "I'm fine," I replied. He leaned on the counter. "You ever get scared, being a woman alone at night?" His voice wasn't threatening, that's what made it worse. It was curious, like neutral, like he was asking about the weather. I stepped back, and I asked, "Do you need anything else?" He tilted his head. "You always keep the door to the back room locked. Smart. I noticed you check it around 2 a.m. almost every night." My stomach turned. I didn't answer. "I'll let you get back to it," he said, with a soft, almost apologetic smile. "Didn't mean to make you uncomfortable." Then he walked out again. After that night, I started walking to my car with my keys between my fingers. I kept a tire iron under the counter. I changed the curtains in my apartment, started showering with the bathroom door locked even when no one else was home. There were nights he didn't come. Sometimes I'd go a whole week without seeing him, but it didn't help. It actually made it worse, because I never knew when he'd reappear. Like the time I came back from my 10-minute break to find a Polaroid on the counter. It was me, refilling the windshield washer bin behind the station. It was taken from that night, close up, way too close. There was no note along with it, but the slash dot on the word "I" and the word "windshield" on the bin label had been circled in red ink. The next time he came in, I told him to leave. I told him if he stayed, I'd call the police. Paul just nodded. "I get it. I've been too forward." "You've been following me," I said, with my voice cracking, and I hated that it did. "I just think you're the kind of person who's used to being misunderstood. I thought maybe you'd appreciate someone who pays attention," he said. "That's not paying attention, that's obsession," I replied. He didn't flinch. Would it be easier if I wore a smile and brought a soda every night? Would I be more normal if I just talked about sports and pretended I didn't notice the way your shoes are always a half size too big, or how your left eyelid twitches when you're tired? By this point, I was already dialing 911. He didn't stop me. The police came quickly, and he didn't resist. He just stood there, arms at his sides, waiting. They searched his car and found a notepad filled with dates and times. It was my schedule. Notes about my walk, my clothes, my groceries. One page just had my name written over and over again in tighter and tighter loops until it turned into scribbles. He kept telling the cops the same thing. "I just noticed things. I'm just a curious guy." The restraining order went through that week. Now I don't work nights anymore. I don't even live in the same town. The company transferred me to another station 2 hours away. But even now, when I drive home and see headlights behind me for too long, I feel the back of my neck tingle. And sometimes, I still think about the way he said my name, like he already knew what it would sound like in his mouth, like he'd been practicing it. I want to start this off by saying at the time I'm writing this happened to me just last night. I worked the overnight shift at a 24-hour gas station. I'm a 22-year-old female, and I've been working there just shy of 2 months. I work the weekend shifts, which is Thursday through Saturday, while another coworker, who I'll call Max for privacy reasons, works the weekdays of Sunday through Wednesday. My coworker Max and a friend of his I'll call Ben had come into the station at about 2:30 a.m. to get some coffee and say hi. Max and his friend had taken some magic mushrooms a couple hours before they came in, so when I saw them, they were all giggly and shit. Honestly, it was pure entertainment for me. As we were talking about random stuff, Ben had made the comments about how there was a car parked in the parking lot with its lights off but running, with someone inside that had been there before they pulled in. He said when he questioned the guy said he was waiting for a DoorDash order. Normally that wasn't out of the ordinary for DoorDashers to wait in their car while we packed an order up. What was odd was I hadn't received an order in almost 2 hours. I spent most of the night in the back of the store cleaning, away from the tills and the front doors, so I couldn't even see the parking lot. We waved it off as nothing, and the two guys went outside to smoke a cigar and play with Max's dog, who they brought along. At first, I didn't think much of it, but once I was alone, I thought it was a little weird considering I didn't know how long they'd been out there before my coworker came in. Fast forward about an hour, and they came back in to get more coffee. It was at that point Max told me more about how the car had been out there parked in a spot that even when I went to the register, I couldn't see it due to the wall. He told me that the entire hour they were out there playing with his dog and smoking in the parking lot, the man in the car had switched between watching them and looking like he was texting someone on his phone. When Ben had noticed this, in his high as hell state, he walked over to the car and asked, "What's up? Why are you looking at us?" At that point, the man had tried to pretend he didn't speak any English. When that didn't work, he switched to English and started saying he must have had the wrong address before hightailing it out of the parking lot. He was definitely higher than Max at that point, but what made it really creepy was Max said that the car looked brand new and had no license plate. He also noticed there was a pile of blankets in the back, enough to hide someone under. And when the man was confronted, another car had just pulled into the lot with its lights off, a car that also looked brand new and had no license plates. And as soon as the first car had started driving away, the car that had just pulled in immediately followed them out. Max had stayed another 15 minutes before they headed out and told me to be careful and to keep an eye out. At about 6 a.m., he came back in for more coffee, and he was definitely sober, so we talked more about it. He said the guy was acting super suspicious the entire time they were out there, constantly checking his phone and watching them along with the entrance to the parking lot and the doors to the store. Even he admitted that he was freaked out, and once he came down from his high, he wanted to check on me to make sure I was all right. We both decided that had they not been there, this whole scenario could have gone one of several ways. I don't know if it was a pure coincidence, or if those two cars were planning on doing something to me as soon as Max and Ben had left and I was alone. I may carry a knife on my person for protection, but my gut tells me that from what they described, that if there were multiple people, it might not have been any good. And if they hadn't been there just playing like kids in the parking lot, something terrible just might have happened to me. I work again tonight, and I'll update if anything happens during my shift. I really wish I didn't have an update for you, but I do. The car came back again during my shift. This is how it happened. It was about 3 a.m., and I was mopping the floors when 4 guys came in to get coffee and some snacks. I was ringing them up when one of them asked if I knew anything about the car that was at the far end of the parking lot, running with its lights off. I looked at the man and asked, "What car?" He then went on to tell me there was what looked like a brand new Subaru with no license plates running with what looked like 2 guys arguing in the front seats. I could feel my heart drop into my stomach when he said this. I told the group that a car with that same description had been sitting in the parking lot the night before, but there was only one guy in it, who I assumed to be the leader of this group, told me as they were pumping gas, they noticed the car as it had been there when they pulled in, and how it just sat there as they filled up their truck. He told me as they were walking to the doors, they passed the car, since they were at the pump farthest from the doors. He said that as they passed, they could hear a guy not quite yelling, but talking pretty loud and pointing towards the doors of the store. As they passed, one of the guys started to walk towards the car to ask if everything was okay. When the guys in the car finally noticed them, they proceeded to put the car in reverse and drive away. I told them that I believed that was the same car from the night before that had been acting suspicious when there were others in the parking lot, and when confronted, he seemed panicked before leaving with another car following him out. They seemed alarmed and offered to stay with me for a bit to make sure they didn't come back. I asked if they were sure, and when they told me it was no problem, they hung around for about 20 minutes before we all decided I was probably in the clear. I thanked them again and let them top off their coffee for free before they headed out, and I was left alone. Nothing else happened the rest of my shift, but I sure as hell kept an eye out when I eventually had to go outside to change the trash at the gas pumps. What's scariest to me is not once did I see this car, but had multiple people warn me about it. At first, I was hoping I was just paranoid and it was really nothing, but to have the same car come 2 nights in a row, at almost the same time, and park in a spot that couldn't be seen from the register or the front windows, makes me wonder if my paranoia is justified. If it is, I'm just glad I had another group of people show up so I wasn't alone if those guys in the car had decided to come in. Thankfully, I don't work for the next few days, and I can only hope when I work again, the car doesn't show up. My name is Daniel. I'm 29, and I work the overnight shift at a small rural motel. It's not a chain, just a family-owned place with 2 floors and maybe 25 rooms in total. I usually work from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. The motel doesn't get much traffic at night, maybe a couple check-ins after midnight if someone is traveling through, but most of the time it's dead quiet. That's why I took the job. I'm not really a people person, so sitting in an empty building most nights works for me. The way it's set up is there's a main office with the front desk, some chairs, a coffee machine, and a little rack of brochures. Behind the desk is a hallway that leads to a back office. That back office is kind of like a lounge. It has another desk, a couch, a mini fridge, and a TV mounted on the wall. The cool thing is that there's a little speaker back there that dings whenever someone rings the bell at the front desk. So normally I just sit in the back, watch something on my laptop, maybe nap on the couch, and then when I hear the bell, I get up and walk to the front. I've worked there long enough to know the regular rhythm of the place. The building creaks sometimes, the heater makes a clicking noise, and the front door buzzes when a guest uses their keycard after hours. Those are all normal sounds. But the thing about working the night shift is even the normal stuff can get under your skin if you think too much about it. And sometimes, the things that seem normal at first turn out not to be. This happened on a Tuesday night back in fall. It was cold outside, maybe in the 40s, and the parking lot was empty except for 4 or 5 cars belonging to guests. It was about 2 a.m. when I first heard the bell. I stood up from the couch in the back and went into the main office. When I got there, nobody was standing at the desk. The lobby was empty. I looked outside through the glass doors, but the road was dark and seemingly empty as well. There were no cars pulling in or headlights or anything. I thought maybe I had imagined it, but the bell is loud and clear, so I knew I hadn't. I stood there for a minute, waiting to see if anyone came in late, but no one did. So I went back to the lounge. I sat on the couch, pulled out my phone, and scrolled for a while. Not even 10 minutes later, the bell rang again. I jumped up and walked quickly into the main office, but once again it was empty. The hair on the back of my neck stood up this time. I went to the doors and stepped outside. The parking lot looked the same as before. The cars were all parked with their lights off and there was no movement anywhere. The road was completely empty too. I walked to the edge of the sidewalk and looked both ways, but there wasn't a single sign of life out there. I went back inside and sat behind the front desk this time instead of going to the back. I figured maybe some drunk person was messing with me, a ding-dong ditch of sorts. Maybe a guest's kid thought it was funny, but after sitting there for 15 minutes with nothing happening, I started to relax again. I leaned back in the chair, opened my laptop, and figured it was just one of those weird things I'd laugh about later. Then the bell rang again. I snapped my head up so fast that it hurt. The lobby was still empty, nobody in sight. My skin started to crawl. I stood up and walked around the front desk to make sure nobody was hiding, but there was no one. I checked the bathrooms of the lobby. I even stepped outside again, nothing. I walked the lot a little, shining my phone flashlight, but it was just dead quiet. I went back inside, and that's when I decided to try something different. Instead of going back to the lounge, I sat down in the chair right behind the front desk. If someone was sneaking around and ringing the bell just to mess with me, I wanted to be there to catch them. I turned the lobby lights down a little so the room was dim, and I just sat there listening. It was so quiet that every little sound made me twitch. The clock ticking on the wall sounded louder than usual. The fridge in the back office clicked on and hummed. Every couple of minutes, the building creaked as it settled. I sat there with my arms crossed, staring at the bell on the counter. 15 minutes passed, then 20. My eyes started to get heavy, and I thought maybe the person had given up. I even started thinking I just imagined the whole thing. Just as I was letting myself relax and doze off, it happened. The bell rang, only this time I saw what was doing it. A pale hand came up from under the front desk, reaching over the counter and pressing the bell right in front of me. I jumped up so fast I'm sure the chair almost fell over, and I bolted down the hall into the back office. I slammed the door and locked it, and I stood there in the dark, my chest pounding. My mind was racing, trying to figure out how someone could even be under there. The desk doesn't have much space underneath, but it's enough for someone to crouch if they squeezed in. That meant they'd been hiding just a few feet away from me, waiting. I forced myself to look at the security monitors. There were 4 cameras, one on the lobby, one on the hallway, and 2 on the parking lot. On the lobby feed, I saw the chair I had apparently tipped over in my rush. The counter looked empty. Then in the bottom corner of the frame, I saw movement. A head poked out from behind the desk. I couldn't make out details, just the outline and the glint of eyes staring straight into the camera. I backed away from the monitor. I couldn't look at it. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911 with shaking hands. I whispered to the dispatcher that someone had broken in and was hiding in the lobby. She told me to stay where I was and that officers were on the way. While I was on the phone, I watched the monitor. The person's head disappeared, and then I saw the person crawl out from behind the desk on hands and knees. He crawled to the door and then stood up. He was tall and wearing a hoodie with the hood pulled tight, and his posture was hunched over. Then he turned around and started walking around the lobby like he was looking for something, and then he turned and walked out of the camera frame toward the hallway that led to the back office. I pressed my back against the locked door. A moment later, the knob rattled. Just once, a very slow rattle, and then nothing. The dispatcher kept asking if I was safe, but I couldn't even answer for a few seconds because my throat felt like it was closing up. After what felt like forever, I heard slow footsteps moving away. I rushed back to the monitor. The man was pacing around the lobby again. At one point, he stood in front of the glass doors and just stared outside like he was waiting for someone. Then he walked over to the brochure rack and started flipping through the papers, as if he were sarcastically killing time. Minutes dragged by. Finally, I saw flashing blue and red lights through the parking lot cameras. The cops pulled up. 2 cars. The man must have seen it too, because he suddenly bolted out of frame. A second later, I heard the front doors open. When the officers cleared the building, they found a large rock near the front door that was presumably used to prop the front door open, but they didn't find him inside. He was gone. They searched the lot, checked the road, and the officer told me whoever it was must have slipped out as soon as they pulled up. I kept replaying it in my head after. The way that hand just came up from under the desk and pressed the bell, calm as anything. Now every time I hear that bell at night, I think of that night and experience. I don't think I'll ever look at that desk the same way again.